Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's been wonderful to see people after being shut in so long for me with knee surgery and everything, but it's really good to see everybody. So can I have Sam, was there anything that you wanted to say regarding the last minutes?
No, I think they're covered well, and if you are all satisfied with them and have approved them, we'll go.
So the minutes are so approved as seconded by Catherine and the members of the board. We're now at the public comment time. Sam, are there visitors you would like to introduce?
I think we have the usual cast of characters beside the board here. You can see on the list, we have Franco. Franco, you can say hi if you want to.
Hello, excuse me. Good afternoon.
And we have, so you'll see Julie Hall here. She is our backup to making sure the meeting is running appropriately. You have Kathy Kakasako. She's our liaison here with the board, also in charge of making sure the meeting works well. Julie Crisp is our technical person, just in case we have any technical hookups. So we have the three of them helping out. The two open signal ones are for the closed captioning and the live streaming of the meeting here. And then, so Kim, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Then we have Stacy here also. You'll hear a lot from Stacy here as we go through the day, so go from there. So I think, yeah, I don't see any outside or anybody else in the audience here, so we're good to go. No additional introductions.
And there are no public comment signups for today.
Okay, then let's just proceed to the action items that are so listed, annual adjustment review, and the question is, what shall be the FPDR 222 benefit adjustment? Sam?
Well, we'll turn that over to Stacy.
Stacy, you're quite popular today.
Is Stacy on?
And she's muted.
She may have to step away temporarily.
Stacy just said she's having internet trouble. She'll be back on in a minute.
Okay. Now we need Stacy. She's going to do most of the talking today again. So,
Sam, since we just a little side talk until Stacy comes, since we are seeing an uptick in Europe with the COVID and that kind of stuff, is there any anticipation of it coming here and respreading again in the United States?
I've been monitoring what they say with in the state and also nationally. They do feel that there is a the COVID Omicron is declining. There's no indication right now that things may go up, but they're watching it closely with it. I know that Europe's on a different cycle than we are, but at this point, there's no prediction or expectation there will be a significant uptick in the next few months. But as you know, with COVID, things can turn dramatically in no time. So everybody be watching closely.
Mhm.
So does that mean then if, it is not an action item for this meeting, and I just think ahead like this, you guys forgive me for that. But if we were to act on that, then are we in a position where we make changes as necessary if something, if there is an uptick in the United States?
Well, if there's an uptick, the biggest areas that are impacted, you would hear both declarations from the national level, and then also you would hear from the governor's office and the Oregon Health Authority as to different levels of state of emergency and if they need to be reinstated. Presently, both the city and the state's COVID state of emergency are still in existence, but the mask mandates have been portion of those have been lifted. We'll talk a little bit more about the impact of that or potential impact on FPDR. And should things get worse, both the state and the mayor can re-up their state of emergencies and give us additional direction. Then we will talk about the FPDR update, talk about the impact of any of the state of emergencies and stuff on the FPDR COVID administrative rules.
Since Stacy is not here, are there others who have a question they want to ask Sam while we're waiting?
Well, I thought I'll just weigh in on what I know from COVID since I get daily updates for my work. Well, I have seen a map of the United States that indicates that about in 36% of the country in regions that are tested, they're seeing upticks of about a third in the presence of COVID in sewer runoff water that they test at various sites. So they're seeing that. But in the Oregon and Portland area, and the closest to us where they're seeing that is in the Seattle area. But in Oregon and in Portland in particular, we're in the green and light area, which indicates that we're quite a bit lower than the national average and that things are stable. So there does seem to be a trend that what's coming over from Europe is starting to impact the United States as well in what they're seeing, but it's very regional. And right now things look good here. So.
That's good news. So Sam, in light of Stacy not being with us right now, how do we fill this void?
Well, we can jump down to the information items. One of the things I did want to talk to you about, and might as well, since we're on that discussion, to talk about COVID. So, as I said, the city has lifted its mask mandate to match the state's lifting of the mask mandate, so the employees don't have to wear masks in the office. But we're strongly urging that they do, but they don't have to. The state has also rescinded its vaccine mandate. So far, the city has not indicated a change in the vaccine mandate, which is requiring all employees to have the vaccine. And they were talking about having volunteers, which would include the 3 of you that don't work for the city. But I think that's going to be changed, and I'm on a meeting this afternoon that will change that. So that's part of the challenges, is trying to understand what's going on, because the state is lightening up and the city is going to be following suit. The governor said the state will lift the state's declaration of emergency by March 31st. So I believe almost all the emergency declaration components will be lifted, with possible exception for public board meetings and public council meetings and public state meetings. And that may go on for a little while longer. So that's going to impact us. We have to wait and see how that happens, to how that's going to impact our board meetings. One thing is that if the mayor will more than likely, and this is not beneficial, but I'm guessing that the mayor will probably lift the city state of emergency about the same time the governor lifts the state state of emergency. And if that does happen, on our COVID administrative rules, there's a 180-day sunset clause in there saying that these special administrative rules for our COVID claims will expire 180 days after the ending of the state of emergency. So if the state of emergency is lifted, let's say effective April 1st, September 27th will be the last day that those COVID rules will be in place. Now, what that means is that if somebody does get COVID after that point, they can still file a claim. They just don't have some of the protections or additional benefits that came with those rules, so they can still file a claim. Now, if any time between now and September 27th, we do get this surge back up and the mayor reinstates the city's state of emergency, it throws that 180-day clock out, and the rules will stay in effect until that state of emergency ends. If the COVID is quiet through September and then flares up next fall, and if the mayor declares a new state of emergency, we will have to come back in and talk about, do we want to reinstate these rules? Because these rules expire at that time and there's no clause for them reinstating. So we'd come back and talk with you, the board, and make some decisions at that point of should there be the state of emergencies reinstated after the 180-day expiration. One thing that we had, and Kim can chime in too, is our COVID claims. I think we're hopefully down on the tail end of the Omicron, where we're seeing a fairly rapid decline. I shared a chart with you, I think about a month ago, of looking at it. You could see our Omicron bump in our COVID claims coming in. We're actually getting more fire claims in the Omicron bump than we got, or not fire, but police claims than we got in the Delta wave. The Delta wave was decimating to the Fire Bureau, but they still saw an increase, but not to the level of the Delta wave. Where it's going down, so it seemed to be mirroring what's happening in the rest of the state. We'll continue to closely monitor that as we do. And again, all the claims now through September 20, well, until 180 days after the state of emergency is lifted, which I would predict be no sooner than September 27th, will be processed under those special administrative rules. And again, we'll talk more about that and keep you up to date on how it's going, and we can come back and revisit those rules at any time with that.
Hey, Sam, quick question. Is there communication being planned to send out to the fire and the police departments about the effect or on the benefits once the state of emergency is lifted?
Yeah, so we'll talk about, once the state of emergency is lifted and the 180-day clock starts to tick, we will go through and I'll work with Kim to how we communicate that out both to our members, our active duty members, of what that means to them. It does not change anybody who is on an approved claim. It does not change the approved claim. It doesn't withdraw any of the benefits that they have under it. It's just be when new claims are filed, that's how it will do. And I think when Chair Carter and I spoke earlier this week, she was talking about long haul COVID claims. And this will be something that Kim and I can talk about in a future meeting in a little bit more detail. If somebody has filed a COVID claim up till now or up under these administrative rules and have a claim approved, and then they are able to go back to work, and then COVID catches up with them and they get a long hauler's sort of rebound to it, they can file a worsening claim. So they've already got a claim approved. They just have to show that it's worsening and it's related to this initial claim that we approved. And again, Kim can come in here and give you more detail on that. And so they are still protected under the plan. The challenge you have is that somebody who never reported the initial COVID claim and then 2 or 3 years down the road has a rebound from COVID, trying to go back 2 years and say, hey, I was infected by COVID back 2 years ago. That's a huge timeliness issue. And that would be a very complex claim to administer and a difficult claim to probably approve. So that's why we always come out. If somebody's been exposed to the COVID or has had COVID diagnosis, we have, and under these administrative rules, they should be filing a claim. Just that puts them on record, that gets the claim approved and could have us evaluate any long haul or any kind of COVID rebound that could happen in the future.
And so, Sam, sorry, quick question. So is the difficulty associated with those long haulers, is it because of the time bar, or is it that it's difficult to go back in time to substantiate that they in fact, had exposure, or is it a combination of both?
Kim, chime in anytime.
Yeah, I'd be happy to chime in on that. That's kind of projecting into the future what we have seen with the existing cases, the few that have had long hauler type symptoms, is that there's been no automatic recovery, and then all of a sudden you're kind of labeled as a long hauler. In the long hauler cases we've seen, they've had symptoms from the onset, and those symptoms never went away. They continued. What the members have experienced is just a lessening of symptoms over time. So we haven't had the scenario yet where someone has had the really short duration COVID experience, symptoms of recovery that has come back. That hasn't happened yet. The long haulers that we see, we know it. It's existing in the record, and they've been treated through their period of recovery. Just much longer than, of course, the normal course, which is why they call it the long hauler.
And I'm sorry.
Just so you do all know, we have had a sharp decline in the number of COVID claims. We've had 4 COVID claims filed for the month of March, which is excellent. And we'll just have to kind of wait and see what this variant that folks are on the lookout for, does for or does to our membership. So does that help you, James?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kim, I wasn't clear on my question.
Oh.
With respect to those who had never filed, a claim in the first instance, and to the extent that they suffered long haul COVID, because in some instances they didn't even know they had COVID, right, until much later on. So I'm questioning whether, the complexity around, they're filing their claim and getting benefits, is that around the time? Because earlier I thought Sam had said that because it was just, more than 2 years or some time frame, right? So is the complexity and the potential denial associated with that time bar, or is it because that it's hard for me now to prove maybe 2 years after the fact that I was exposed to COVID, a couple of years ago, right? I think
the latter is going to be more the issue for the member, is just that showing that what they're experiencing several months or a year or so later is related to something that happened at work. And of course, we would rely on medical expertise. This isn't the decision we would make, but that could be the challenge. And that's why we ask them to report right away if they've had it at all. So yeah, there are definitely going to be challenges with someone who is coming back several months or a year later to tie it to an event that may have happened recently. It's going to be a challenge.
Great, thank you. Yeah, because I know that there are antigen tests out there that could substantiate that you had exposure to COVID before. I'm just not certain about the effectiveness, of detecting that antigen, after some period of time. So, right, thanks.
That will be new territory for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Sam, I thought I saw Miss Stacy had come back.
Yep, she's
I'm
there.
back. Sorry.
All right.
I apologize, everybody. I had to reboot my computer. I should have known. I was suspicious this morning that it was taking so long to save documents. And anyway, I apologize, everybody, but I'm back.
It's all good.
And as hopefully next time we're in person, we don't have any of these problems. Yeah, again, then we have different problems, but not these problems. Are you guys ready for me to start talking about COLA?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I mean, there's hardly any more exciting topic, right?
Right.
Cost of living. It's pretty exciting to members, actually. So let me pull up and start sharing my screen. Just give me a minute here to get set up. Switch you. All right. Can everybody see the presentation okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right, so since I didn't get to introduce myself, since I wasn't here at the beginning, just for the record, I'm Stacy Jones and I'm the Deputy Director, but I'm here today to talk to you guys about the pension program and also about finances, which are the two things I oversee at the Bureau. So we're going to talk about cost of living adjustments, otherwise known as COLAs, for our pension beneficiaries. And the board's role in this process is to select a COLA for our FPDR2 members, subject to certain parameters that I'm going to go over. So I'm going to go over the board's authority with respect to the COLAs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of how that authority has been used, particularly in the last 7 or 8 years. Give the board some factors that you might want to consider in making your decision for this year. And then at the end, I'll just compare some COLA options just to give you a sense of the differences between some different options, along lines like cost and impact to the members. And because, Trustee McLeod has been through this ad nauseum, Trustee Culp has been through this once, I think, but for the rest of you, this is a new topic. So I'll go over things in a little more detail than I will in future years if we still have the same board. But please stop me if you have any questions. It seems like a simple topic. There are a few places where it gets a little bit complex. So moving on. So let's start by talking about the board's authority. But before we turn to FPDR2, which is what all the rest of the slides are going to talk about, let me tell you a little bit about the FPDR1 pension beneficiaries and the kind of COLA they get. So as a reminder, we have 2 tiers to our FPDR pension plan. The FPDR1s are those who were retired or on long-term disability already in 1990 when the FPDR2 plan was created. There are only about 300 FPDR1s still with us, and that includes both retirees and surviving spouses. So their pensions are calculated differently than FPDR2 pensions. Their pensions are a % of the current pay of active duty police officers or firefighters, as the case may be. And that is calculated as a % of, they call it first class police officer pay or first class firefighter pay, and it's calculated on July 1st each year. So that means that they get COLAs every July 1st that are equal to the wage increases of active duty firefighters and police officers, kind of in a nutshell. So now that we have final contracts for both police and fire, fire's had their contract in place for a while, but the police contract expired on June 30th, 2021, and was just ratified by the union and by City Council a couple weeks ago. So we now know the COLAs that active duty folks will be getting on July 1st, 2022, which is 5%. They'll be getting a 5% COLA on July 1st. So that is then by default what our FPDR1 members are going to receive. They're going to receive 5%. But since I sent this slide deck out 2 weeks ago, we have since determined that a new premium in the police contract for crisis intervention training, which is a 2% premium, is going to be part of first class officer pay, because all officers will be required to have the training that you need to have this premium. So that's another 2%. So what that means is our FPDR1 police beneficiaries on July 1st, and this is updated from the slide you're looking at right now, are actually going to receive a 7.1% increase, because the 2% and the 5% compound together to create 7.1. And our FPDR1 fire folks are going to receive a 5% increase. So the total cost for that, just to let the board know, is going to be about $800,000 rather than the $650 that's on your slide, because of that additional 2% at police. So, those are big increases, 7.1%, although I have to say, even at 7.1%, we're not quite keeping up with inflation, because inflation has been even crazier. But those are big increases, but there just aren't very many FPDR1s remaining. So that's why the cost is still less than $1 million, even with those big increases. And as a side note, the police contract also includes a 1.6% COLA that's retroactive to last July 1st, 2021. The fire folks already got that COLA last July 1st because their contract was in place. The police folks are just getting it now that their contract is going into place. So that means that we will likewise issue a retroactive 1.6% COLA for our FPDR1 police who had not previously received a COLA at all on July 1st, 2021. So that's being processed right now as we speak. So they'll get that 1.6%, which will, kind of bring them up to where the fire FPDR1s already were. And then fire FPDR1 will get 5% on July 1st, 2022, and police FPDR1 will get 7.1% on July 1st, 2022. So there's no decision for the board to make here. I just wanted you to be aware of what was happening with that smaller population of older retirees who are in FPDR1. Are there any questions about that before I go on?
Stacy, could you tell them what percent of their final pay they're receiving?
FPDR1s, so at the maximum, they get 60% of that first class police officer pay or first class firefighter pay. And that's if they have 30 years of service that they get that 60%. So the FPDR1 pensions are so the big COLAs that they're getting, but their pensions overall are much less generous than the FPDR2 pensions, which may be what you are wanting me to mention, Sam.
Yes.
And that is regardless of,
Stacey?
oh yes.
But it does not exceed the $800,000 that you have already placed in the budget.
Yeah, we did not budget for a 7.1% COLA for the FPDR1 fire police. So it does exceed the budget by about $150,000, but we got plenty of extra in the budget, to cover that kind of thing. We have about 14 million extra in the budget.
Okay.
So that we can cover that extra 150,000. We had planned for a 5% COLA because we knew when we built our budget that was the most likely scenario, but we did not plan for there to be an additional 2% across the board salary increase at police.
Any further questions for Stacey? Okay.
Great questions. All right, so I'm going to move on then to slide 2. Which is what we're really here to talk about, where the board needs to make some decisions. So for FPDR2s, who is was the plan that was started in the 1990s and includes everybody who is retiring now, as well as folks who have been retired since about 1990. The board has sole discretion over COLAs for the FPDR2 members, except for a cap. City charter says that the board cannot grant a COLA that exceeds the COLA that sworn PERS retirees receive. And so I've excerpted that section of the charter there for you on the slide. The city attorney's office, 7 or 8 years ago, gave us a formal interpretation of that language, which is that they believe that means that the board cannot exceed the maximum COLA, the highest COLA that any PERS retiree, any sworn PERS retiree receives. And notice the distinction in how I'm putting this. What it does not, there's a difference between saying that the board can't employ a COLA approach that might result in an individual getting a larger COLA than they would have received if they were a PERS retiree, and saying that no FPDR retiree can get a COLA that's greater than the highest COLA PERS gives sworn retirees. So the city attorney's office interpretation has been the latter, which is that the board cannot award a COLA that is higher than the highest COLA that PERS gives anyone, which is currently 2%. So legally, the board may not give more than a 2% COLA, but you can use a COLA approach or a COLA calculation that is more generous than PERS calculation might be for similar individuals. But that is the nature of the cap. But other than that, other than exceeding, you can't exceed that cap. Other than that, the board can do pretty much anything that you want with this COLA.
Stacey, have there been circumstances when that was done as to why this is necessary language?
I don't know why this language was included in the charter back in the early 1990s. But ever since the FPDR2 plan was created, I'll talk about the history in just a moment. I don't know why they put that in the charter, why they put that cap there, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. If anybody else knows, they can chime in. It's too long ago. So let's talk about what the board has done in the past. That's the board's authority, but I'm sure this board that's mostly new wants to know what the approach has been in the past. So apologies to Trustee McLeod, who already knows all of this. And like I said, I think Trustee Colt has heard this once, but for the benefit of the new trustees, let me talk about the history for just these next couple of slides. So the first thing to know is that for decades, from the time the FPDR2 plan was created until 2013, the FPDR board used the exact same COLA calculation, exact same methodology that PERS did. And that method was to give a COLA equal to inflation up to a cap of 2%. But if inflation was more than 2% in a year, retirees got to carry over that excess for use in a year when inflation was less than 2%. And since inflation is usually more than 2%, people built up these big carryover balances, with the result that once you'd been retired for a couple of years, you were pretty much guaranteed a 2% COLA every year. So that was the method. It was identical between PERS and FPDR from the time the FPDR2 plan was created until 2013. But then the 2013 Oregon legislature decided to blow things up and change the PERS COLA. And then of course there was subsequent litigation at the Oregon Supreme Court. So that sort of, tossed everything up in the air. And when all the dust settled, what PERS wound up with is described in this little box that I put on your slide. So it's a little bit complicated, but you can get, so PERS retirees, this is the current PERS method and has been the PERS method from 2014, since 2014. You can get a blend of up to 3 different COLA rates, depending on the timing of your service and the amount of your benefit. So for service before October 2013, which is when they tried to change the COLA, you get the old method that I just described, which is 2%. For service after October 2013, you get 1.25%. And if your benefit exceeds $60,000 a year, you only get 0.15% on the portion that is over $60,000. So that means that at PERS right now, anybody who was retired before October 2013, who has all of their service before that date, gets 2% every year, which is why we can still go up to 2% with our COLA. But those retired after October 2013 get something less than 2%. But it's different for every individual because it depends on the percent of their service that happened before and after October 2013, and it depends on the amount of their benefit that's over $60,000, if any. So that is, the folks who retired after 2013 kind of get their own individual personal COLA. Folks retired before October 2013 get the 2%. So that is what PERS does now. And the rationale, you'd have to go ask the Oregon legislature, but I mean, essentially it was to save money in a system that is not fully funded. And so that was really the rationale. So since that time, when the PERS COLA changed, the FPDR board had to decide what to do because, the board had been just doing what PERS did and it started asking itself if that was still appropriate. So since then, the board has done some different things. Sometimes they've given 2% to everybody, which is the maximum that the board can do. And sometimes they've used a modified version of this PERS methodology, but the board has always used a method that is more generous than the current PERS method. But they have sometimes used a method that is similar to the PERS method. So let's look at that in a little more detail on this next slide. This chart will show you specifically what the board has done each year since PERS changed its COLA method back in 2014. So notice that this table goes backwards in time. So this first row is July 1st, 2021, and we're going back in time to July 1st, 2014. This next column will tell you what COLA the board awarded to our FPDR2 retirees. In years where there's a range, that's because it mattered when someone's service occurred. So folks got different COLAs in that method. This kind of gives you a summary of what the COLA calculation was, kind of, a little brief summary. This column tells you if the COLA the board awarded was more or less than the PERS COLA would have yielded for the same person. It's always been more for the last 8 years. And then was the COLA that the board awarded more or less than inflation that year? It gives you a sense of whether it was more or less than inflation. So you can see that there have been 4 years where the board just gave 2% to everybody, which is the maximum permitted. But the first 2 years that they did that were 2014 and 2015, which was when the PERS COLA method was in litigation. So they partly did that out of uncertainty as to how things were going to shake out. But in these other 2 years, most recently last year, the board gave 2% to all, clearly out of making that choice. And then in the other years, the board elected to use a modified version of that PERS COLA method. So in 2016, 2017, and 2018, these 3 years here, what the board did was do the PERS COLA methodology, but they just used this part of the box. They just looked at service split before and after October of 2013. They did not get into whether benefits were more or less than $60,000, but they did that blend of 2% and 1.25% for the FPDR2 retirees. Of course, the vast majority of them retired before October 2013, so the vast majority still got 2%, but some folks got less. And then in 2020, the board also used a modified version of the PERS methodology. They did the same thing that they did in the other years, except for they made this 1.25%, 1.75%. So they made it a little more generous by upping that, that lower COLA that you could have blended in for your service after October 2013. So that, that is what the board has done for the last 8 years. Since the PERS method was changed. So Trustee McLeod was around for some of those years and can probably speak to this as well, but let me attempt to give this board a sense of the issues and concerns that the board kind of had in mind while they were making those decisions over the last 8 years. I mean, the first was obviously just being aware of inflation and wanting to make sure that members were at least partially maintained their purchasing power. I mean, that is the purpose of a COLA after all. And the board was always aware that since historically inflation is greater than 2%, even if they awarded the maximum 2% COLA every year, that FPDR pensions would not fully keep up with inflation over the long run. So, I think the board had that as a consideration in their decision making. The mirror image of that, the other side of that was thinking about costs for the taxpayers who fund FPDR pensions. And just as COLAs are very valuable to retirees over a long retirement, they are also very expensive over the long run. So I think the board has also been thinking about taxpayer cost. And in the earlier years, but I would not say this has been a major consideration recently, in the earlier years, there was some thought given to making sure that the FPDR levy stayed safely under that $2.80 cap that we have in city charter. So wanting to make sure that the board would not contribute to the possibility that the levy would ever exceed that cap with a too generous COLA policy. But since the increases in real market value that we've seen in Portland over the last decade, and that 280 cap is based on real market value, it's just become increasingly unlikely that we're ever going to need to be concerned about that cap. So I don't think the board has been too concerned about that for the last several years. But finally, I would say that there has been also kind of a back and forth about how important it is or is not to maintain a connection to the PERS methodology. Obviously there's a historic connection in that for decades we used the PERS methodology, and even since the PERS methodology have changed, we have still sort of anchored to that methodology in many ways. And there's obviously a legal connection since the city charter prohibits the board from exceeding the highest COLA that PERS gives sworn retirees. But beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of room for interpretation among individual board members and individual judgment about how desirable or appropriate it is to continue to maintain a connection to the PERS COLA method, particularly since it changed in 2014. So Trustee McLeod, I don't know if you have anything that you would want to add to that.
No, I'm good. Are there other questions from board members? Catherine, was there a question?
No, I'm going to respond to what Stacy had said. I think you did a very nice job of summarizing the issues and the history of it.
Great. Since you were there for at least the most recent part, I better make sure if I'm not missing something. But I think those have been, kind of the main driving considerations that the board has had over the last couple of years. So that's the history, especially for the last 8 years. But now you have to think about what you all want to do as your own unique board with 3 new members for a COLA decision for this year. And so before I kind of turn things over to you guys to discuss and think about what matters to you, I want to give you a little bit of a framework for thinking about the decision this year. Some considerations you might want to have in mind, several of which I just mentioned as issues that the board has given weight to in the past. The first is what we just talked about thinking about how well the COLA does at maintaining purchasing power for our retirees, which again is the reason that COLAs exist. So they exist to try to keep pension benefits up with inflation, at least to some degree. So I think you want to think about how good a job different COLA approaches do at maintaining purchasing power. But again, bearing in mind that even if you give the maximum COLA of 2% every year to everybody, pension benefits will not fully keep pace with inflation, unless we are entering a crazy period of really incredibly low inflation over the next 30 years, which at least right now does not seem at all possible. The second consideration we also just talked about, it's the flip side of maintaining purchasing power for retirees, and that's the cost to the taxpayers. As the taxpayers are funding 2 generations of pensions simultaneously during this transition from the pay-as-you-go FPDR pension to the pre-funded PERS pension, which means that the tax levy has been going up exponentially for the last 15 years, and it will continue to go up exponentially for the next 15 years. And COLA costs come on top of that. So, I think we should be aware of that context of taxpayer cost. However, I do also want to remind the board that, as we talked about in January, the tax levy is actually going to decline next year, which is a one-off situation. It's just happening next year because I want to use up some of that excess fund balance we built up out of caution during the early days of the pandemic. A third consideration is to think about the economic context, which is another obvious thing to think about for both our members and the taxpayers, kind of the world they're living in right now. And the most important thing, I think, to say about the economic context is that we've had record-breaking inflation over the last year, over 7% in 2021. And the future is very uncertain. I mean, nearly all economists believe inflation will eventually temper. If you had asked a few months ago, I think a majority of them would have told you that would have happened by now. But world events seem to be conspiring against us. And at least for now, inflation remains very high. It has not dropped considerably since the end of the year. It's essentially still at 7%. And short run inflation projections are kind of all over the map right now. So nobody knows what will happen, but I can tell you that inflation was higher than it has been in 40 years last year. And it continues to be there right now as we speak. Another slide of potential things the board might want to consider is the board might want to think about what other plans do, particularly Oregon PERS, since we have this connection to Oregon PERS, and how comparable our plan is to those other plans. I mean, we've already talked in a lot of detail about what the FPDR board has awarded for COLAs compares to the PERS COLA for the last 8 years. And before 2014, we did the same thing as PERS. But I think kind of wrapped up in that consideration is how the board feels about the limit in city charter, how board members interpret that charter language, and how the board feels about maintaining any kind of connection to the PERS COLA method beyond not just exceeding the maximum PERS COLA, if the board thinks that is important or not. I mean, since PERS changed their COLA method, we have always done something more generous than PERS. On the other hand, as compared with PERS retirees, our members don't usually qualify for Social Security benefits, and they are more likely than PERS retirees to have spent their whole career in one place. Our folks tend to spend their entire career at Portland Fire or Portland Police, and so they kind of have all their eggs in this basket, so to speak. I mean, the city does offer a deferred compensation plan with an IRA, 401k type plan, although the city does not match contributions. But so for our folks, it's more likely that this is their only source of retirement income other than anything they have saved themselves. And I think a final important thing to consider is the long run. It's always important to consider the long run when you're making financial decisions, and whether it's more important to the board to be consistent year to year, or whether it's more important to the board to maintain flexibility year to year to respond to whatever unique circumstances might be arising in that year. COLAs are an incremental compounding benefit, just like interest in your savings account. It's the exact same, concept, which means that they really have to be costed over a long period of time to understand their true cost and their true benefit to members. But in any, because in any given year, they're neither very expensive nor very valuable in any given year. 2% is not a lot in any given year, 1.5%. But over 30 years, different COLA approaches do yield very, very big differences, both in terms of cost to the fund and in terms of benefits to the members. But we don't have a COLA written into our plan like PERS does. It's up to the board to make this decision every year, which makes it impossible for us to say how much COLAs are going to cost taxpayers or benefit retirees over the long haul, because we don't know what future boards will do. Past boards cannot constrain what you do today, nor can the 5 of you constrain what future boards are going to do. So we have to acknowledge that. But all the same, I think it's important for the board to think about, and where possible to be explicit about, whether a decision in a given year is intended to be a long-term approach that the board is hoping to have some consistency around, this year and into the future, or whether this is a 1-year decision made in response to particular circumstances and considerations that exist this year. In other words, that the board is using their flexibility rather than setting like a long-term approach that the board intends to follow. And so that just comes down to how the board wants to balance consistency and flexibility, both of which have their merits. Consistency is a great thing, but flexibility is a great thing as well. So in these last couple of slides, before I turn it over to the board to discuss, I thought it might be helpful to look at kind of the cost and the impact of 3 different possible COLAs. So I just picked 2%, 1.75%, 1.5%, and the 2% is the max that the board can do. And you can see that that would cost about $215,000 next year. Whereas a lower COLA, like 1.5%, would cost more like $160,000. So the spread between a 1.5% COLA and a 2% COLA is only about $50,000. Like I said, that's it's not a big cost difference in any 1 year. Trustee McLeod will probably notice that this table does not include a service blending option. It doesn't include a modified version of that PERS method that you saw earlier and that the board has sometimes used in the past, where there are different rates blended together depending on service timing. And I thought that it was a better approach this year with a new board to just show the costs and some illustrations for these 3 different possibilities. And that's partly because I think you get a good sense of the difference between different COLA amounts by just comparing 3 simple options. But it's also partly because my sense over the last few years has been that the board has wanted to move away from the PERS blending method. But that may or may not be the case with this board, but that has been my sense. So if the board does want to do something that more closely mimics the PERS method or some of the modified PERS methods we've used in the past, or if the board wants to do something that's more nuanced or complex in some other way, that's fine. But these options hopefully cover a wide enough range that it kind of can allow you to envision where the possibilities might fit in terms of costs. And then also in terms of these last 2 slides, because again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to look at a COLA just for 1 year. I think it makes more sense to think about a COLA approach over a long time, which is what the next 2 slides do. So bear with me for these last 2 slides while I explain to you what they're showing you. This slide takes a look at what each of those COLA levels, the 1.5%, the 1.75%, and the 2%, would look like in terms of maintaining member purchasing power if that was the annual COLA every year for the next 30 years. And I'm using 30 years because that is the median length of an FPDR retirement. At the median, FPDR members are retired and being paid by us for 30 years. So this chart attempts to show you how well COLAs at those different levels do at maintaining purchasing power over that 30-year retirement. So we start with the median benefit of a new retiree over the last 18 months or so. So over the last 18 months, when you just look at the median of all their starting pension benefits, it's a little over $8,000 a month. It is a very generous pension, as we've talked about before. And then these green bars show you what the benefit would need to be each year if the benefit was fully keeping pace with inflation. So let's pause and say, well, what's inflation? I've assumed 2.25% annual inflation to create these little green bars, and that may be too low. That is just still our long-term inflation assumption from our last plan valuation. Again, nobody knows where inflation is headed in the short run, and even over the long run. So it's hard to say if inflation is going to settle back to that 2.25% or 2.5% level or not. But because this is still the long run assumption we're using, that is what I use. So that's what's used to create these green bars. So if we assume that 2.25% is our average inflation over this 30-year period, after 30 years, that $8,000 benefit would have to be over $15,000 in the 30th year before a retiree passes away to maintain the exact same purchasing power that they had on the day they retired. So if the board gave a 2% COLA, which is the orange line, every year for the next 30 years, they gave everybody 2%. At the end of those 30 years, our member would have a pension benefit of about $14,500, which would be about 93% of what you would need. You could buy 93% of the things you could buy on the day you retired. With a 1.75% COLA, which is the red line, that pension benefit 30 years from now would have grown from about $8,000 to about $13,500. And they could buy about 86% of the things that they could buy when they retired with that benefit. And then a 1.5% COLA, which is the purple line, after 30 years, that benefit would grow from $8,000 to about $12,500 a month, which would allow them to buy about 80% of the things that they could buy when they retired. So I know this isn't shocking, that a 2% COLA does a better job of maintaining purchasing power than a 1.5% COLA or a 1.75% COLA. But I think it gives you a sense of the difference between the three in terms of how well it does at allowing retirees to keep pace with inflation. But I also want to emphasize that this changes a lot based on what you assume inflation is. I've assumed it's 2.25%, but for example, if inflation actually averaged 2.75% a year over this 30-year period, this 1.5% COLA would just get you to 69% maintenance with a 1.5% COLA, not 80%. So maybe that also gives the board a feel for the sensitivity of this to different inflation assumptions, how good of a job different COLAs, if applied consistently over 30 years, would do of maintaining purchasing power for members. Which brings me to the last slide, where we're just going to flip that mirror and think about cost to the fund, which is actually a lot harder because the underlying retiree population is going to change a lot over the next 30 years. But we want to isolate the cost of just the COLA for purposes of this discussion, because again, I'm just trying to give you all a sense of the scale, a sense of the scale of difference between these different approaches and the impacts to the fund. So this chart pretends that we have the exact same retiree population for the next 30 years, that nobody dies over the next 30 years and nobody new retires, which is obviously ridiculous. That's not going to happen. So this really is just for illustration. So you can see the magnitude of the cost difference of each of these approaches over the long run. So after 30 years, so right now our annual pension expenses are about $128.5 million a year. So if you gave everybody, all those retirees, 2% COLA every single year for the next 30 years, at the end of those 30 years, our pension costs would be about $237.3 million. If instead you gave everybody a 1.75% COLA every year for the next 30 years, it would be about $220 million. And if you gave everybody a 1.5% COLA every year for 30 years, it would go from $128.5 million now to about $204 million at the end of the 30-year period. So at year 30, the difference between a 1.5% COLA in the purple line down here and a 2% COLA in the orange line up here is about $30 million. So you can see how, next year the difference is only about $50,000, but if you consistently apply a 2% COLA versus a 1.5% COLA, by the time you get to 30 years, there's about a $30 million difference between the two approaches. So I wanted to make sure that the board saw that. So that is all that I have prepared today to sort of prep the board to discuss what you would like to do with the FPDR2 COLA this year. So now I will pause and ask if folks have questions. And of course, you guys are welcome to discuss.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. And I have a lot of questions in my mind, but I don't want to ask any questions until I hear from the board. Catherine, Lang, you guys, any thoughts on this?
Well, Chris Culp here, can you hear me? Okay. I think in my mind, just saying that we're at what 7 point something in is probably a more truer COLA this year. And I didn't realize how many years we'd gone where the retirees had gotten less than COLA, right? Where the blend was, they were less than inflation, what, 6 out of the last 8 years? So
it has, I don't know if you were asking me a question, but yes, I mean, both the PERS COLA and the FPDR COLA have always averaged less than inflation. I mean, that has always been the case ever since the plan was created. Because even in the days when everybody got 2% every year, inflation is historically more than 2%.
Right. Is there a way to calculate how far behind we think retirees are? I mean, so individual that how would you figure out where they, I don't know, there's a way to do that. I'm not a math guy by any means.
Well, it would depend on the year in which it would be different for every retiree because inflation is different every year. Right. So you'd have to look at, each individual person and say, well, you retired in this year and this is what inflation has been since you retired. And here's what your pension benefit is now since you've retired. Because inflation's been different every year and the COLAs have been different. But that is still, this slide is still kind of intended to help you get at that question, even though it would be different for every individual. And there are a lot of assumptions. The assumption behind this is that inflation is only 2.25% on average. But you can see that, 2% COLA almost gets you to full maintenance of purchasing power in that scenario.
Right.
A 1.5% gets you to 80%. So they've fallen 20% behind in this scenario with that inflation at a 1.5% COLA.
On your next slide, is there any way to put that into terms 30 years down? I mean, again, I'm grasping at straws here. We know the $2.80, right, per value of a home, $1,000 per value. Is there any way to put this into context to maybe what that would look like down the road? Or is that just, am I thinking too much?
No, you're not thinking too much. I couldn't do that on the fly. And I hesitate. I have to say, I did think about doing that before, actually. Actually, my lead financial analyst suggested I do that. But then we decided not to do it because we're straying so far into the world of this is already like a silly hypothetical situation where I've pretended that nobody dies or retires over the next 30 years. And once we start converting it into a levy, now we have to make assumptions about real market value growth and assessed value growth over that 30-year period. And we really can't ignore the fact that the population, the underlying pension population is going to change.
Sure.
But I mean, I can tell you that, you can think $30 million now, and our levy right now is over $200 million, as a percentage. And what would it be compared to then? I'd have to go and look at our projected levy. We actually don't have a projected levy 30 years out. We have one projected 20 years out to get a sense of, how big of an impact is that on the tax levy?
I just find myself torn between membership being able to purchase, right? Keeping the funds stable and not wanting to approach that cap. And I know we always talk about, because of the real estate market here locally, the cap continues to get further away, right? But what if that changes tomorrow? What if we have some sort of a correction in the housing market? That could drastically bring us closer to that cap, right?
Well, it could, but it would have to be a dramatic correction, and it would have to be, I think we would have to see, now I'm straying into even more hypothetical situations that I haven't run numbers for, so I hesitate to do that. But it would have to be a dramatic situation. I think we would have to see declining real market values, very substantial ones or smaller ones over a really long period of time. What I can do is stop sharing and pull up our most recent levy adequacy analysis, because I'm trying to remember where we think we're going to peak. It's just left my head in the early 2030s, which will be our moment of peak expense, early to mid 2030s. We're still nowhere near the cap, even in kind of worst case scenarios that Milliman runs for us, we're still under the cap.
Right.
So
another thing,
I guess
one thing that we could say is that the levy projections build in a 2% COLA assumption, do they not? They're at the maximum.
Yes, you are right, Trustee McLeod. Yes, in this last levy adequacy analysis, they have not always done that, but in this last one, they built in a 2% COLA. Yes, actually,
Okay.
thank you. That's a good way to get to the heart of the matter.
All right, those are the questions off the top of my head. I will turn it over to somebody else.
Good question?
Good question. Good questions.
Okay, I'll jump in. This is Kyle McLaury. So what I'm struggling with is just this fundamental acceptance of this whole process that the retirees' buying power is going to erode. That is the foundation on every scenario that we're looking at, and that's just accepted. So that's a little bit of the struggle. Other thing I struggle with a little bit, and I get it. I get everything you said about the history. They were tied to PERS. The structure of the COLA is tied to the structure that PERS uses, while the benefit structure is completely different. Where, like, as you mentioned, you alluded to this, Stacey. So for FPDR2, this is all, and I am FPDR2. That's my pension. That's all that I have. Whereas the PERS members, they have their defined benefit, they have their defined contribution, and Social Security. So while their retirement is a three-legged stool, mine's a one-legged stool. And I guess if it makes sense for that on the PERS side of it, for this assumption of an erosion in their defined benefit, because they have the other two sides of the stool to prop things up. So I guess the question, and this is sort of 10,000 foot view while we're all just thinking too much, does, particularly in this year where we're looking at a charter change commission, does this board have the ability to make recommendations to the commission or to the city council to address the language that is tying us to PERS? That might be something more for Lauren or Franco to address legally, but has this been a discussion that we've had before on this board?
I'll give you a bit of background here with the Charter Commission. The Charter Commission is independent of the city. The city has given directive because of its independence that none of the bureaus or boards can influence what the Charter Commission is doing.
Okay.
I've tried to put some stuff up there for suggestions and they were moved away. And this goes to all bureaus. There's been a lot of pent up demand to make charters things. So it's going to be hard to near impossible to get the Charter Commission to look at this. And even if the Charter Commission did, it still has to go in front of the voters. And you've seen how the voters have treated PERS, and the voters are the ones that help support through the legislature to lower the PERS cost of living even lower than what we're discussing today.
That wasn't the voters, Sam. That was the legislatures.
Well, but the legislature through it. I mean, you're going to have to go to the
Right.
city of Portland voters to get this through. And so if it goes through that, you're going to have to get a big groundswell support for people because this will raise their property taxes to do it. You're going to have to tell them your property taxes are going up. And, we hear from quite a few people when they see it on their property tax line, fire and police pension, why are we doing it? What's going on?
I've heard that as well.
Yeah, so that won't be an easy battle to win if you go to the voters. The second avenue is to go through the council itself. The council can go straight and put a vote out there to the, through their initiative process, a referendum process, excuse me, to put something on the board. I've been pretty much told, because we've looked at making a couple other tweaks, that the council won't do that until the council commission or the Charter Commission is done with their work. So that's going to be a hard thing. The last one is to get an initiative where people sign a petition and put something out on the ballot. And again, I don't know who's got the resources or the money to do it.
So
I understand what you're trying to do, but right now, given because I've explored making some other changes to the plan going through the charter, and it's not getting a lot of reception yet.
Okay, so the Charter Change Commission is sort of irrelevant to this. If we wanted to, as a board or as a bureau, you could make a suggestion to City Council separate and not even not involve this. I was just thinking the Charter Change Commission because that was something that was happening this year.
Right.
Okay.
No,
It
again,
looks like Franco has something to add.
Okay.
As well.
And this is just for the discussion that Trustee McLaury raised. And as I sit here today, I'm struggling with whether what the reason is that FPDR members don't get the Social Security benefit at retirement. Do you know that
Yeah,
offhand, Stacy?
well, yeah, they're just not Social Security covered.
That
And
was,
that's part of the contract, that they're not Social Security covered, so they don't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay.
The city doesn't pay Social Security taxes on their behalf, so they're not accruing Social Security.
and
Okay.
part of that is the reason why their percent of their pension is higher. Percent of final pay is higher than they would be getting in PERS. PERS, I think, is what, 67%, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy, 85% is the max you can get through our plan. So you can get a higher percent of your final wages help to try to offset that. But that was a negotiation between the unions and city council
But
decades ago, and has never been revisited.
just for clarity of the record, the benefit's not available because it's not being paid into by these individuals. That's essentially it, right?
Well,
Okay.
it is saving money for, so yes, Portland firefighters and police officers don't pay the 7.65% FICA tax that other city employees pay. And the city also does not pay that matching 7.65% on behalf of those folks. So it's a savings to both sides. And the last thing I would contribute to this discussion, and I'd actually be curious to hear Trustee McLeod's thoughts on this as well, is just to make sure folks understand that pension plans don't, it would be extremely rare for a pension plan to have a COLA that allowed you to a benefit to fully keep pace with inflation.
Okay.
Many pension plans don't have COLAs at all, and many have, and kind of at best, they have something similar to this. But Trustee McLeod, you have a very broad experience of pension plans. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I will say that in the private sector, they're really non-existent. In the public sector, they used to be pretty generous, kind of floating up as high as 5% per year. I mean, that would be your cap rate is up at 4 to 5%, but they have certainly come down and been limited more to a maximum 2, maximum 3%. So that is much more typical. Now, the fact that, again, the FPDR2 people are not covered by Social Security does cause an inflationary impact on them more, because as Trustee McLaury said, if this is your sole source of retirement income, Medicare and Social Security keep up with inflation to some extent. Again, not completely, but to some extent. And so you're not getting that through a portion of your benefit with Social Security. So I think it does make it more meaningful and important for Tier 2 members. Since I'm talking, I'll weigh in with a little bit of historical perspective from the board, with admittedly my bias on there. In terms of the 3 tiers and the PERS, the consistency with PERS, at least in the years since I've been on the board, we've taken the position to not even consider the post-2013 service and the lower COLA that PERS applies for that, because it's set based on a income or benefit level cap. And as time goes on, that cap is going to be a bigger and bigger, a smaller and smaller part of it. And so it creates it doesn't make sense because that cap isn't increasing over time. So we just kind of threw that out as inappropriate. Benefits over 60,000 a year, 10 years and 20 years from now, that could be half of the benefit that's over 60,000, and it would get little or no COLA. And that just didn't seem equitable. So we just kind of, in the recent years, have just done away with that and said, we don't want to think about that, just because it seems inappropriate for a portion of benefit that's not even being, where that cap is not being increased annually to keep up. As far as the second tier, the benefits, after 2013 with the 1.25%, as you can see in that past 8 years of history, that has been done a bit, but in recent years, we've tried to differentiate, I think, a little bit less between the pre and post 2013, recognizing that change was made by the PERS board and approved, by the citizens it was a budgetary thing. That was the reason. It was, they needed to get the plan funding under control. And so they used this as part of the limited means that they had available to them to reduce the cost of future benefits and get funding under control. That's not the situation here. So absent that situation, differentiating between 2 different groups of employees, based on their hire date, that it's commonplace, but it's really, there's not any other justification for it other than budget. So My personal bias is away from, a COLA for those hired before and after 2013 being different. And so I prefer not to do that. And while I'm rolling, I'll just give my 2 cents worth for our recommendation for this year. And that is, while this is a challenging discussion and a challenging history, I don't think it's really an issue for this year. Inflation has been so high. It just seems to me a no-brainer to just go with 2% approval across the.
Stacy, are we presently at 2% for COLA?
So this is, you guys get to decide.
Yep.
Last year, it's up to the board. And last year, for July 1st, 2021, the board awarded 2% for all. And it sounds like Trustee McLeod is proposing that the board do that again this year.
I am doing exactly that.
I would second that.
I would, yeah, okay.
So it's been moved and seconded that we will do a 2% COLA as we had done in the past year. Is that the question on the board, on the floor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just ask one question.
Yes.
Before that, a 2% COLA will not produce an increase in property taxes?
We have budgeted, we assumed a 2% COLA in our budget because that was the most that the board could give. And we are usually conservative in that. So no, it will not produce an increase in property taxes for next year.
Then I
Good
will
question.
join in seconding the motion. All in favor?
I
Aye.
I so have it. There you go, Sam.
Thank
Just
you.
what a good job you did, Stacy.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Carter. And I really appreciate the board discussion and getting a clear decision, which is always great for our retirees because they can plan and now know what they're going to get in July. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you,
Right.
thank you, Catherine, as well.
I do want to say to Kyle, I have marks on my back, stripes on my back from when this legislation was first brought to the legislature. I don't know why my picture is not up there. I don't know what's going on. Why my face is not showing, but I have stripes on my back, and the reason they didn't do the Social Security thing because the portion that we were doing for the fire and police was greater than what PERS recipients were receiving at that particular moment. And it was a down and dirty piece of legislation at the time, I should tell you. Anyway, thank God we got it through, and fire and police can get the benefits that they receive. Any further comments?
I'll make a comment here. A lot of you asked some great questions. You may want some follow-up questions and clarification. Stacy's available all the time. Go ahead and email her or give her a call. She'd be glad to go over this with you. It's complex and you may have more thoughts and ideas about what this is about, what we could do in the future. And so we've moved pretty quick to 2%, which I think everybody's in full support of. But you still may have questions. Stacy is available for any and every question you have about this, even some of the levy analysis, because I think, Christopher, you had some questions about how this interplayed with the levy analysis. So we'll be glad to do it. And if necessary, we can just have sort of an FYI question and answer session in a future board meeting, or Stacy can answer your questions directly. Because this stuff's extremely important. It's very important to our members that we do it. And I know everybody would like to probably make some changes to the program going forward or try to understand it better. So again, reiterate for about the 4th time, give Stacy a call or an email. She'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, Stacy.
I hope it goes without saying that you all can call me anytime about anything.
Okay.
Well, maybe not anything.
We'll confine it to the budget. So, Sam, are we down to the information items that you want to start discussing?
Oh, yes. And Stacy isn't off the hook yet. She's got the first one on summary expenditures.
Okay.
Yeah, that should be, I don't have it's in your books. I don't have it open right now. Otherwise I'd share it up on my screen with you. But I think really the only really interesting, well, depends on your definition of interesting, is just to note that we have paid off our tax anticipation notes. You know, we issue tax anticipation notes every year because we don't get most of our tax revenue until November, and we have to start paying folks money in July. So for the last 2 years, we have borrowed money only for the first 6 months of the year and repaid in January. Whereas normally we borrow for as long as we can for 10 or 11 months, as we do need to repay the TANs within the same fiscal year. Normally we borrow as long as we can because we make money on it, again, within the IRS arbitrage limits. But I have been nervous the last 2 years about the volatility in the bond market. And so I just got nervous about negative arbitrage, which is otherwise known as costing us money. So I've wanted to repay those TANs as quickly as we could, but I was afraid for nothing. The interest we got on our TANs this year was 0.21%, and we've been earning about 0.5% on those proceeds in the city treasury. So now I wish we'd actually held on to them for a little bit longer. But given the uncertainty when we issued these TANs, that's why we've repaid them already. So not really anything else board worthy in the expenditure report, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions?
Go ahead.
Catherine, did you say yes? I'm sorry.
I did have one question, Stacy. And in the August transactions for the pension benefits paid for FPDR1 and 2, it's a really low number. It's usually 11.5 million or more, and it's 25,000.
And that is probably, I'm sorry, I'm opening it now because I failed to have it open. So let me make sure that I'm looking at, and in fact, let me share my screen so other folks can see your question. Let me know if folks can see, and I'll try to make it big. Is that big enough for folks? I know the print is really tiny.
That's good. That's great.
So you're looking at this line, the FPDR1 and 2 pension benefits.
Yeah.
And you're over here looking at this kind of hilarious looking line where it's $25,000,
Yep.
where it's $25,000. And I'm actually myself wondering July, August, September. I'm wondering if we have, normally you see this happening because we had 2 pension payments in the same month, because pension payments, if they are on a business day, fall backwards. But I am myself a tiny bit mystified because then I don't see a double payment in the subsequent year. So I'm wondering if we have some kind of data glitch going on. Oh, it's the accrual. Oh, it's the accrual. Yeah, that's okay. I see what it is. So actually, if I were to pop open my calendar, was August 1st. Let me just pop that open over here. Was August 1st a business day? Because we also have to accrue benefits back because those benefits are for, yep, that was it. Okay, so the August 1st pension payment was actually, because that was a Sunday, it was actually paid on July 30th. So you will see this is really, this 11 million, this 11.7 million is really the August 1st payment, because the entire July 1st payment was accrued back to the prior fiscal year, because the July 1st benefit is actually a June benefit paid on July 1st. So under full accrual accounting guidelines, we have to accrue that expense back to the prior fiscal year. Well, you almost got me on that one.
Okay, all right. Thanks for explaining.
Keeping me on my toes. But yeah, the combination of the accrual and it shifting back in 1 month, that's what makes it look so funny.
Okay, got it.
Thanks, great question. Almost stumped me.
Other question? Sam?
Okay, so the next item on the information things is FPDR board meeting location and city vaccine policy for volunteers. I'm going to apologize. This is the third time I've put this on a board meeting agenda. It's the third time I'm going to pull it, because every time I get my notes ready, the state and the city all change their COVID rules and declarations of emergencies and vaccine requirements. So we're in the midst of doing that right now. So anything we talked about would be meaningless. However, in the May board meeting, we are going to talk about this topic because everything should be settled down. And admin, our FPDR admin rule of 5.2.01, titled regular and special meetings, describes how, where, and when we have our board meetings. I thought it was a good idea to look through that rule, bring in the new requirements, because there's been some state statute change to some of how the meetings are run. And then the state of emergencies, I believe, will be lifted by then. So we'll talk about how we want to run board meetings in the future. this rule that I refer to, 5.2.01, and I will show it to you in May, what the rule is. It's decades old. It's way before FPDR3 was created, way before we had a change in the structure of the board and some of the structure in FPDR. And so some of the things in it don't make sense anymore. And they've only had one tweak in 2007. Since then, for the last, 15 years or so, there's been no changes. It's time to update it. We've got, remote meetings and hybrid meetings and stuff. So we just need to update that a little bit. And so we'll bring all this discussion into that month. So I apologize again for that, but just things are changing so fast. And for, I think some people, it's changing for the better as far as giving us more flexibility and trying to get back to normal meetings. But again, we'll save that for May. In May, we'll still be doing the remote meeting like we're doing now. Any first meeting that we may see a change could be in July, but again, we'll talk about that in May. The next topic is legislative update. They just finished the 2022 legislative short session. Can't too many S's there in Salem. I'll throw that in there too. There's only one bill that had any impact on FPDR. It's House Bill 4113. That was a bill where they added cancers to the existing firefighter cancer presumption. And that presumption was part of workers' compensation law passed in 2009. So the cancers they added were bladder cancer, gynecological cancers of the uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, cervix, vagina, and vulva. The primary focus of this bill was to bring parity between male and female firefighters, because the present list has testicular cancer and prostate cancer, which were considered very male-oriented cancers. And there is some indication that some of these cancers I listed may be associated with firefighting. So that's how the bill was presented, was to bring parity between all firefighters, and take away the gender disparity. FPDR supported the bill, but we had expressed some concerns of the lack of data and studies showing that some of those cancers that I named to you are associated with firefighting. There's just no study out there indicating that some of them are. And other people that had testified, this is testifying in front of the Management Labor Advisory Committee, which advises the legislature on workers' compensation laws. Some other people testifying had the same concern. So added to this bill was a portion that requires the Management Labor Advisory Committee to review and consider reports by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. That's a part of the CDC. They're doing a study right now on cancers associated with firefighters. I'm not certain that report's going to be out. We're hoping it's out in the next year or no longer than 2 years from now. So the statute requires the committee to review that and take action on that. And what action that may be will be up to the committee. Do they look through all the cancers that are on the cancer presumption, maybe add some, take some away, maybe change the existing statute? We don't know. But that's what they wanted to do. And that was how they addressed the concerns of where we can find the right kind of studies and data to support all the cancers that are now in that presumption. The bill's effective January 1 of 2023. So any firefighters diagnosed with any of those cancers prior to or after January 1, 2023 will be administered under the cancer presumption. What we'll have to do, there's no action to be taken by you, the board. There's no action taken by us, except we now have to consider these cancers when a claim is submitted and consider them under the cancer presumption statute. We do, however, the city council has to pass an ordinance to update the FPDR plan to reflect these additional cancers, because the state statute supersedes the charter and supersedes the plan document. So the city council has, per our charter, a part of the charter chapter is 5.403, says the city council has the authority to pass something to change the charter so it complies with the law. So that will be coming up in the next few months. So any questions on that legislative update or the cancer presumptions?
No
Yes,
questions, but I'm so glad we did that. We worked on that for a long time for women in fire. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that is now taking place. Sam?
And one thing about this bill, it was co-sponsored by 25 senators and representatives of both parties. So there was no opposition to it, just the concern expressed that we need to get some more data to support the list of all the cancers that are now in the cancer presumption.
hey, Sam, I agree. I think this is a step in the right direction. And I'm just curious whether there is any way that we can anticipate how the additions of these cancers may impact our budget.
We have so few female, the bladder cancer applies to male and female firefighters, clearly. The female diagnoses or cancers, we have so few female firefighters, and the chances of them getting one of these cancers is going to be very low. So we don't anticipate any significant impact of the budget overall. Cancer claims and an individual cancer claim can be expensive. But again, how it impacts the budget is going to be minuscule. I don't anticipate much of that.
Great, thanks.
Further questions? Sam, last item?
Let's see. So just general other FPDR update information. Going to go through my list here. Okay. And Kathy said hi to you earlier today. And I'm announcing here that Kathy is retiring June 30th. She's been with FPDR for over 25 years. She's a very unique individual who's very integral to the culture and the operation of FPDR. And it will be impossible to replace her, although we are going to hire her a replacement. But so this is a big loss of the Bureau, but exciting for her to go on to the next phase in her life of what she's doing. And what we'll be doing is hiring a replacement here pretty soon, so that we'll have about a 3-month overlap. So Kathy can train and impart her wisdom to her replacement. So congratulations to Kathy.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Congratulations, Kathy. Thank
Congratulations.
you for years of service.
Thank you. I'm going to be a grandmother, so I'm going to retire.
Wow.
Good job.
Good for you.
Just don't leave town because they're gonna.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, she will be a consultant for us for quite a while. We did that with another person we had. We still have a consulting agreement with one of our last retirees because there's just a tremendous amount of knowledge that we always need help with.
Yeah. It's hard to lose 25 years of knowledge in 3 or 4 days to train someone.
Yeah.
Actually, next Sunday is going to be 27 years.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, fantastic. So are there further questions from members of the board? I appreciate you guys so
Well,
much.
I have some more here to go. Just a couple
Oh,
more
you have
updates.
some more? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, future meeting agenda, sorry.
Well, it's under FPDR updates, and I've got a lot of sub things that I didn't list with that.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, and so with Kathy's retirement, I thought this is a good time to take a look how we take board minutes. Kathy's perfected after, what do you have now, almost 27 years, the art of taking meeting minutes. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to take a look at that process. We're looking at how PERS takes meeting minutes. We're looking at how the city council takes it. So we'll come back to you when we talk about this in May as part of how we, when we look at admin rule 5.2.01, how meetings and stuff are run. We'll talk more about what we should do with minutes in the future, how we can do it, making sure that we can meet your expectations for what they should cover and go there. So I think it's a good opportunity to talk then. Two small more things is that the city is beginning to open offices up for employees to return to work in the office. So from April 1 to April 17th, all staff will have to choose one day to come in if they aren't already in the office during that time period. And then effective April 18th, staff will work a minimum of 1 day a week in the office. And we're setting up schedules so people have the ability to work 4 days a week at home and 1 day a week in the office. That's a trial period that will last through probably Labor Day, and the city will then reevaluate, what that hybrid plan is and make any changes. And so we're taking the opportunity of having some team days because Stacy has about 7 people reporting to her, as does Kim. And so on one day, every other week, the teams will get together so they can interact and have some in-person meetings and try to get to know each other again with that. So that's what will be happening coming up real soon. And the move status. So the city council approved the lease. We are in the process of getting it signed, and signing a lease takes multiple people to review it, but we're in that process. And so that will happen here shortly. We're ordering all the furniture and the construction, all that will start soon, but we just need to get all the last final signature and the lease done. Then that will all begin to happen. Targeting a move-in date around July 1. That's probably the latest we would move in. We may move in earlier, but we're going to have to wait until we can figure out to coordinate with the construction and then the furniture and cube layouts to be installed. So that's where we're with those. And that's everything I have for today.
Does that mean that there are no other questions? You guys are that raring to go? You don't have any other questions? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion accepted by Catherine for the meeting to be adjourned. Thank you guys so much for today's activities. And
Thank you.
again, salute you, Stacy, for such a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Even with all of its complications. So we'll see you next month.
Yep.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care.